Yes, and Executive Secretary Elizabeth.
Good morning. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
All great. We can see and hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegation from Colombia.
Hello, good morning. Can you hear me and see me?
We can hear and see you perfect.
Thank you.
I will wish good luck to everyone then, as the time is up. If you do encounter any problems, please let us know in the chat, and we'll answer all your questions and we'll help with any issues that occur. Have a very great meeting, and thank you so much.
Good morning, all. Francis is experiencing some technical difficulty, and we will be starting very, very shortly, a matter of seconds. Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Oh, Francis, you're there.
Yeah, I'm there.
Go ahead.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to call this meeting to order. Distinguished delegates, in the year and a half since our last meeting, drought by the harrowing impacts of COVID-19 pandemic. To those who have lost loved ones, you have our deepest condolences. We are indeed making progress, but the fight is far from over, and we continue to hope and pray for better times. To those who may be sick or suffering from the disease, we wish you quick recovery. Before we begin our work, Coach, I would like to take the opportunity to all those who have lost to COVID-19, and therefore we request that we join or observe a moment of silence. May their souls rest in peace. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of my co-chair and I, we have the great pleasure to welcome you all and to declare open the third meeting of the open-ended working group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We wish to thank the Executive Secretary and her staff for the excellent preparations that has made it possible for this meeting to happen. We also would like to thank the Bureau of the Conference of the Parties for their continuing support and advice. This virtual formal session of the working group is intended to carry forward our work towards the development of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Based on the work accomplished under the virtual meetings of SAPSA 24 and SBI 3, I am confident that we can continue to make progress together at this session. I would now like to give the floor to my co-chair to welcome you all. Basil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Francis. And good day, good afternoon, good evening to every one of you. It's a pleasure for Francis and I to welcome. Those last few months have been very difficult months. Francis talked about COVID. There is many different problems that affect us, and one of which being the necessity to work online and not being able to be face to face. I want to thank you, all of you, each of you, for your patience and your engagement, and for the work you have done in preparing for those meetings. Francis and I have been interacting with many of you over the last few weeks, and we know the efforts and the hours you've put into preparing for this meeting. We're looking forward to the discussion. We're looking forward to hear your views. Now, the work is a little bit different for us. We're in the mode of listening. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for all your work. And now we're going to look forward to hear your views. Back to you, Francis.
Thank you, Basil. Ladies and gentlemen, dear delegates, we are fortunate to have with us Dr. Hamdallah Zidane of Egypt, who will address us on behalf of the COP14 presidency. Dr. Zidane, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Francis. Good day, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. The representative of the current president of the Conference of the Parties, Egypt. It is an honor for me to welcome you to the third meeting of the open-ended working group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. I would like to express my thanks to the government of Colombia for hosting this meeting. I would like also to express my solidarity with all of you, especially those who lost loved ones or suffered hardship from the harrowing impacts of the global COVID-19 pandemic. We have come together today for the opening of the third meeting of the working group, where you will seek and advance the development of an ambitious, robust, and transformative post-2020 global biodiversity framework and maintain momentum for its adoption at the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties in Kunming, China. I would like to thank the co-chairs of the working group and the COP Bureau for their guidance in preparing for this meeting. The co-chairs have put before us a first draft of the framework for consideration and demonstrated that they are ready to face any challenge necessary to carry forward the work of the convention and its protocols. Now it is the time for the parties to build on their good preparations to get the work on the text of this draft at this session and the resumed session planned for January to prepare a final draft for consideration by COP15 itself in Kunming. Distinguished delegates, we have clearly reached a make or break moment for both the people and the planet. This year and the past year, we witnessed a continuation of a devastating global health crisis as well as an endless series of global climate impacts, from droughts to floods to unstoppable wildfires. The message is unmistakable. We must take immediate steps to heal our broken relationship with nature and halt the reverse the loss of biodiversity. We must take urgent action this decade to address the interlinked biodiversity and the climate crisis, as our survival depends on it. At this meeting, you will consider the first draft of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which will provide a roadmap for putting biodiversity on a path to recovery before the end of this decade. The world is counting on you to deliver a global framework with high levels of ambition that can motivate and unify all actors in society and government. I am confident you will help advance this important work and take another step forward towards a safer, more sustainable, and equitable world. For the sake of future generations, the global community must act urgently and finally achieve the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. I look forward to hearing your views, perspectives, and inspiring discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zidane, for your remarks, and thank you for your ongoing efforts in support of the convention. May we offer our sincere thanks to the excellent leadership and guidance that the government of Egypt has provided while serving as COP14 presidency. Colleagues, as you know, the government of Colombia will convene a high-level pre-COP event on the 30th of August 2021, comprising a panel discussion among ministers and heads of states and governments. The high-level event will seek to promote the development of an effective post-2020 global biodiversity framework. We would like to invite His Excellency Carlos Morales from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Colombia to address the meetings. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
I think perhaps I just saw in the chat that he has a problem connecting that the Colombian, there's something in the chat that Mr. Carlos Morales is having trouble connecting, so maybe he is not connected. Maybe Colombia can raise their hand and we can find out.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning. Sorry, yes, our head of delegation, Mr. Carlos Morales, could not connect yet. So I don't know if we can wait to give him the word later.
No problem. We'll accommodate that.
And come back to him. Thank you.
We can accommodate that. Maybe then let's move on. Colleagues, over the last week, we received some welcome news regarding COP15. After extensive consultation with the government of the People Republic of China, a decision has been made to convene COP15 in two parts. The first part will take place in a virtual format from the 11 to 15 October 2021, with a limited on-site presence in Kunming. The second part will reconvene in a face-to-face meeting in Kunming from 25 April to 8 May 2022. I would like to invite His Excellency Vice Minister Zhao Yingmin of the Ministry of Ecology and Environment of the People Republic of China to address this meeting. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Chair, Secretariat, Executive Secretariat, the interpreter. Okay. We'd like to thank the meeting. The opening meeting signifies a progress made. We have overcome the impact of the pandemic. We have come to a stage that we can have face-to-face meeting. We'd like to thank the two co-chairs and COP14 presidency for the efforts made. As the president of the COP15, China, together with the international community, is eager to reach an ambitious and pragmatic post-2020 GBF in a party-driven manner, which balances the three objectives of the convention and takes full consideration of the attainability of the targets and availability of resources. China welcomes the first draft of the post-2020 GBF by co-chairs and secretariat. We welcome that. It provides a basis for further in-depth discussion on the structure, wording, and quantitative values. China calls on all parties to maintain an open attitude, keep close communication, jointly find practical solutions, strive to reach as much consensus as possible at this meeting for the achievement of the GBF. And I think this is also something we can do for our future generation, for our future. Dear colleagues, there's only less than 2 months left till the opening of the first part of COP15 in Kunming, as the whole country of the COP15, China is making great efforts to better prepare for the conference. We've doing a lot of work to overcome the impacts of pandemic. The first part of the meeting conference includes a 2-day high-level segment, where high-level representatives will be invited to participate online, and the release of a Kunming Declaration, which will be built on broad consensus. Parallel events such as Ecological Civilization Forum will also be held. I sincerely invite all parties to participate in the COP15 in October so that we can together boost the confidence of the international community in biodiversity conservation. Lastly, I wish this meeting a complete success and look forward to seeing you again in Kunming in October next spring. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We would now like to invite the Executive Secretary, Ms. Elizabeth Maruma Mrema, to address the meeting. You have the floor, Ms. Mrema.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to extend a warm welcome to you all at this important third meeting of the Open-Ended Working Group on the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. I'm honored to support you and along with the Secretariat as we take another step down the road that will ultimately take us to the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties, which will include the adoption of hopefully an ambitious and transformative post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Honorable co-chairs, I sincerely thank you and your colleagues in the COP Bureau for your excellent leadership in shaping this formal online meeting. I would equally like to thank the governments of Canada, Poland, and the United Kingdom for generously providing extra financial resources that will address the additional costs incurred for our virtual meetings, including the services of our excellent interpreters. Likewise, I cannot forget to thank the governments of Australia, Canada, Finland, Germany, New Zealand, Slovakia, Sweden, Switzerland, and the European Union for providing funds to facilitate effective participation of developing countries' participants as well as the indigenous peoples and local community. May I also extend a special appreciation to the government of Colombia, who will convene a high-level pre-COP event on 30th August 2021. This important event will further contribute to building a political momentum we need to ensure our success at the COP15 in Kumi. I should note that a number of participants assembled for this meeting is indeed impressive. We are joined by over 2,245 registered participants, representing 137 countries and about 212 observer organizations whose participation helped to ensure that our work is truly universal. Ladies and gentlemen, the stark warnings emerging from the recent assessment by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, along with the global wake-up call of the IPCC Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 6th Assessment Report, have shown us unequivocally that we do not have a moment to spare. But we must not lose hope. Instead, we should recall that while we cannot predict the future, we can shape it together. We now have the knowledge and the ability to address these problems on a scale unimaginable. But we must urgently chart a new course and ensure that our actions in the coming decade will set us on the sustainable path. Dear participants, since the second working group meeting in Rome, the road has proven longer and more winding than any of us could have foreseen. But with your determination, resolve, and cooperative spirit, we have arrived at our meeting today. And you have before you the first draft of the new Global Biodiversity Framework as prepared by our co-chairs to guide our actions worldwide through the 2030 to preserve and protect nature and its essential services. While still a work in progress, the first draft proposes 4 goals, 21 targets, and 10 milestones that can bring us closer to living in harmony with nature by 2050. The world is demanding demonstrable progress towards a framework that can galvanize urgent and transformative action by government and all society. They are calling for an ambitious, agreed framework that will allow the convention parties and stakeholders to develop ambitious national and regional goals and targets through their national strategies and action plans, and facilitate regular monitoring and review of progress at the global level. I sincerely wish you all successful deliberations, and as always, thanks to my dedicated team, the Secretariat continue to stand ready to support you all in your work. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Mrema, for your words of welcome and for outlining the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead of us. Of course, we look forward to your continued support in facilitating this meeting and the post-2020 process generally. We would also like to reiterate our thanks to you and your team for your hard work in preparing for this meeting. Dear delegates, I've had to temporarily put off my camera because I think it is affecting the quality of my internet. I'm continuously having to refresh, so you may not be seeing me for a while. Sorry about that. We would now like to invite the Secretariat to give us some information on the use of the microphones and on accessing documents from the website. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Francis. We actually would like to pause this meeting for 30 minutes with apologies. We are having some difficulties with parties and observers having problems to connect, and we need to fix that issue before we move on. So I apologize deeply from our side, but we need to take a pause for half an hour. Thank you. I think people can stay connected in this time, so, and while we help others connect, so please don't disconnect, because I also had a problem connecting back in. So please keep your connection, and we will just keep you updated. But if we could take a pause for half an hour. Thank you.
then we have to change our laws
Hi, all. With great apologies, we still need a few more minutes a few more minutes to solve this issue, and we will keep you updated. We also do want to let you know that this was not an interactive problem, but it was actually the link between our CBD website, the priority pass, and access to interactive. So it was not something that was an issue on the platform, on the interactive platform, rather our IT link to it. So we will keep you posted. Please bear with us. And again, deep apologies for this.
Hello.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, my name is Peter. I'm calling from you.
Okay, the Secretariat, apologies for the interruption. The Secretariat has an announcement to make. Also, over to you, Jyoti.
Thank you so much, everyone, for waiting. We are now 45 minutes delayed, but with great thanks to our interpreters, we will continue for 45 minutes after 10 o'clock. So we'll continue till 10:45. And just to let you know that if there is anyone who has, if you know of anyone who still has a problem, since this was a problem that we were trying to solve one by one, please get in touch with the Secretariat in the normal way that you get in touch with the Secretariat. And we ask them to get in touch with the Secretariat, and we will solve the problem for them. We have a much higher number now that has joined, and I hope that we can start now. I think we could start with Colombia, His Excellency, the Vice Minister, if he is there, but because I was supposed to warn them, but it started so quickly, so I haven't warned them. Maybe he's there. We can start with that. Thanks.
Excellency Carlos Morales, you're able to join us.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. Madam Elizabeth Maruma Morema, Executive Secretary to the Convention on Biological Diversity, Mr. Basil Van Havre, Mr. Francis Orwell, co-chairs of the Open-Ended Working Group, Mr. Hamdallah Sedan, Senior Advisor to the Minister of Environment, and representative of Egyptian Presidency of the COP14, distinguished delegates. On behalf of the Government of Colombia, host country of the third session of the Open-Ended Working Group and the Pre-COP on Biodiversity 2021, it's an honor for me to address you today. I would like to begin by expressing my deep gratitude to the Secretariat and the co-chairs for the efforts to set up this session and to prepare the first draft of the Global Biodiversity Framework, despite of the adversities that have emerged by the spread of the COVID-19. The third session of the Open-Ended Working Group represents one of the last stages of this long process since COP14. We come today at a critical moment to assess if the level of progress and ambition of our work responds to the urgency that science demands from us to secure our environment and the livelihoods of the present and future generations. As one of the most mega-diverse countries of the world, we will continue to work in collaboration with all parties in the design and implementation of robust commitments for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, as well as for the equitable sharing of the benefits arising out of the access and utilization of genetic resources. For this session, we invite all parties to be constructive, creative, and identify specific solutions for the remaining gaps and differences. Allow me to highlight that under the first draft, we still have a lot to do in terms of actions towards the achievement of sustainable consumption and production patterns. We welcome the inclusion of critical conservation and restoration targets, but protecting 30% of our planet and restoring 20% of it might not be enough if we do not sustainable use of the rest of it. We need, therefore, to strengthen the elements around sustainable value chains from food systems and circular economy. The Global Biodiversity Framework, we need to reverse biodiversity loss by 2030 and address the climate emergency will require transformative action. We need to be prepared to engage all our productive sectors, the private and financial sectors, so that we can transit to a nature-positive economy, one that has successfully closed the gaps between the harmful and positive incentives for biodiversity. Such an ambition, especially under the unprecedented circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic, requires a renovated multilateralism based on a strong international cooperation. While all countries must do their part to protect nature, it is critical that we agree on a robust means of implementation. We will not be able to achieve our task without empowering all relevant stakeholders in the implementation of the framework, including civil society, indigenous peoples, and local communities, local governments, business, women, and youth. This meeting is a unique opportunity not only to continue hearing their voices in the design of the framework, but also to reflect on the ways they can contribute to scale up our action on the ground, our partnerships, and our reporting. Colombia, as member of the Leaders Pledge for Nature, the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People in the Global Ocean Alliance, is convinced of the importance of the cooperation spirit among governments and non-state actors to accomplish the vision of living in harmony with nature by 2050. In this regard, the President of Colombia, His Excellency Ivan Duque, with the collaboration of the Secretariat of the CBD, will host the pre-COP on biodiversity next Monday, 30th August, to promote the high-level political commitment with the adoption of a transformative global biodiversity framework in COP15. You are all welcome to join us in this event and add your voices, bring announcements and actions towards the adoption and implementation of an ambitious and effective framework. Distinguished delegates, we have the privilege and the responsibility to be part of this historical momentum for our planet and humanity. Let's advance decisively in this session towards a successful COP15. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you, Co-Chair. Dear delegates, we shall now go back to where we were. I think I was at the point of inviting the Secretariat to give us some more details on how to use the microphones and also accessing the documents from the website. So, Secretary, now you have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Good day, everybody. And once again, deep apologies from our side for the delay and any inconvenience this may have caused you. So just to give you a little bit of information, as you are here, you have successfully joined this session today. But I wish to point out that to join all plenary sessions, you will always need to connect through the working group homepage from tomorrow onwards on the CBD website by clicking join or through the meeting calendar. We ask you not to save the interactive link into your browser, as plenaries and contact groups are different meetings. Therefore, we kindly ask you always join the meeting from the working group homepage. Then from the calendar, select the session you wish to attend, followed by the type of connection you need for this session, whether it is speaker or viewer. As you have been informed through the scenario note, plenary sessions will be recorded and streamed online, and statements submitted in writing will be posted online unless the Secretariat is informed otherwise. The CBD Secretariat has developed an online application that allows countries and organizations to upload their statements to the meeting page. It is highly recommended that participants use this tool instead of emailing their statements, as it helps streamline the meeting process and facilitates the work of the interpreters. We will still, however, monitor the email address statements@cbd.int. Please be sure to include the name of your country, organization, and the agenda item on the first page of the document that is uploaded. It greatly facilitates the work of the interpreters if you can upload your statements in advance of delivery. However, they will be posted on the website only after delivery. In any case, statements as well as any associated recommendations for text changes must be posted within 12 hours of the closure of the session where the agenda item is addressed, if they are to be considered in the further work of the body on that item. Uploading instructions were included in your Priority Pass email, along with your dedicated link, which leads you directly to the upload page. All plenary sessions will last 3 hours per day and will be held from 7 to 10 a.m. Montreal time, with a 15-minute break approximately midway through each session. Please note that plenary sessions will become active for you to connect 90 minutes before the start time. As has been part of all our meetings, the Secretariat will provide technical training and testing 60 minutes before plenary. Requests for the floor by parties will be heard for each agenda item. Statements by other government stakeholder groups or other observers will also be heard as time allows. Statements on each agenda item from parties and observers will be limited to 5 minutes on behalf of regions and groups and 3 minutes for individual parties. For major group, each statement is limited to 4 minutes, and for other governments and other observers to 2 minutes as time allows. Please remember that as you speak, your interventions in plenary are being translated into 5 other official UN languages by a dedicated team of interpreters. In order to facilitate their challenging work and make sure that we can all understand each other, please keep the following in mind. Keep background noise to a minimum. You can do this by wearing noise-canceling headsets and microsets. Please mute your electronic devices and notifications. Check your sound using your own voice before joining the session, and upload your statements before delivery rather than after. If any speaker encounters connectivity issues that prevent them from making their statement, they should contact the Secretariat to make alternative arrangements. There will be no general, regional, or group statements during the opening and closing sessions of the meeting. Each agenda item will start a short introduction of the item by the Secretariat. Regions may provide the statements on each agenda item. The list of all pre-registered participants is available online at the link you can see on the screen. To use your online system, when the chair opens the floor for interventions, if you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list visible to the chair. When the chair gives you the floor, the moderator will activate your microphone and the status bar will turn red on your computer. Please wait a few seconds after the status bar turns red and then start speaking. In the event that the chair gives you the floor to speak and you have not raised your hand, please press the raise hand button so the moderator can see you on the list and activate your microphone, turning the status bar to red and enabling you to speak. We would also like to remind participants that the chat box is for brief communication, mainly regarding any need for technical support, and therefore to keep your remarks here short. Please note that the co-chairs will not be viewing the chat function. The Secretariat will be monitoring the chat function and communicating with the co-chairs as needed. The time for statements is limited. A clock is provided for you on the screen to help you manage your time. But please do speak clearly and slowly and not speed up your reading. Rather, when speaking, please pause between sentences to make it easier for interpreters and delegates to follow you. Also, please note that towards the mid-session, the chair will announce a 15-minute break. There is no need to log off during this time. Finally, in our effort to continuously improve our services to participants, the Secretariat is pleased to inform you that a virtual display table is at your disposal for the duration of the meetings. Parties and observers are invited to make use of the display table to share publications, information materials, and events that relate to the issues being addressed by the working group. To consult these announcements and for information on how to submit an announcement, click on the tab Virtual Display Table located on the right-hand side of the web portal of the working group meetings. Thank you very much. Maybe we have lost our co-chairs. Basil, do you want to take over?
Thank you. Thank you, Secretariat. We'll now turn our attention to item 2 on our agenda, organization of work. Distinguished delegates, before we begin, let us remind ourselves that the rule of procedures for the meetings of the Conference of the Party apply, mutatis mutandis, to the meeting of the open-ended working group. Also, the Bureau of the Conference of the Party will serve as the Bureau for the working group. My co-chair and I will chair the meeting in accordance with the designation and mandate specified in Decision 1434. At its last meeting, the Bureau has designated Ms. Laina Al-Hawadi to be the rapporteur of this meeting. We see no objection. Thank you. We thank Ms. Laina Al-Hawadi for agreeing to assume this responsibility, and we look forward to working with her in the coming week. The provisional agenda for this meeting is contained in document CBD/WG 2020/3/1, and the annotation to the provisional agenda are contained in CBD/WG 2020/3/1/add1. The provisional agenda was prepared by us together with the Executive Secretary in consultation with the President and members of the Bureau. We now submit the provisional agenda as contained in document CBD/WG 2020/2/1 for adoption. We see no objection, so the agenda is now adopted. Distinguished delegates, let us now turn our attention to the organization of the work. Document CBD/WG 2020/3/1/1, the annotation of the agenda, contains the proposed organization of work for this meeting, and in the next one, the list of documents that are made available to facilitate our deliberation. The proposed organization of work for this meeting has been developed pursuant to the mandate given to the working group of the Bureau of the Conference of the Party, which requested me, along with my co-chair and with the support of the Secretariat, to develop a proposed organization of work for formal session of this third meeting. The organization of work was subsequently considered and adjusted by the Bureau of the Conference of the Party and is set out in the Annex to Scenario Note contained in document CBD-WG 2020/3/1 add 2 Rev 2, which provide detailed information on how we will proceed. In the interest of time, we will not go through the Scenario Note in detail. However, we invite you to refer to it. The meeting will be a mixture of plenary and contact group meeting. Finally, we would like to explain how we see the outcome of this virtual session of the meeting. We envisage that our final plenary of this session on September 3rd, we will proceed as follows. For agenda item 4, we would receive a final report from the co-lead of each of the contact group and take note of their work. The contact group will have been working on different sections of the text of the first draft of Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The outcome of these text-based discussions would be appended to the report so that the discussion can resume when the meeting is resumed in January 2022. For agenda item 5, we would receive a final report from the co-lead of the contact group on digital sequence information and consider the CRP resulting from their work. The final outcome would be appended to the report to inform further work. We hope this is acceptable. Are there any objection to the proposed organization of work? We see no objection, so the organization of work is agreed. Before we proceed to the next item, we would like to bring to your attention the following. We would like to suggest that in order to make efficient use of the time and to allow more time for discussion, we refrain from making individual statements to thank or congratulate the chair, our host, or the secretariat. Therefore, we would like to invite the rapporteur to make a statement of thanks on behalf of all participants so that this can be avoided in international intervention. Ms. Lena Al-Hawadi, you have the floor.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. بالنيابة عن جميع المشاركين في هذا.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of all the participants, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the co-chairs of the working group and members of the Bureau for their hard work in preparation for this meeting. I wish you the best of success for this meeting. On behalf of all of us, I also thank the Executive Secretary and her team for the preparations for this meeting. I also would like to thank the government of Colombia for hosting this important meeting and those parties that have provided generous funding to facilitate this meeting. I have no doubt that our deliberations will be very productive. Thank you, co-chairs, for having given me the opportunity to speak on behalf of all the participants. Thanks again.
Thank you, Ms. Lena Al-Hawadi, for those remarks. Distinguished delegates, we have completed item 2 on the agenda of our meeting. We will now take up agenda item 3. Over to you, Francis.
Hello.
Over to you, Francis. We can hear you well.
Oh, so thank you, Co-Chair. I'm sorry the network is so bad on my side here today. Just not sure why it's hearing that way. I'm assuming now we are going to agenda item 3. Is that so?
Yes, please go ahead.
Co-Chair?
Basil, are you online?
I am online.
I think we just lost Francis again. Perhaps you can pick up.
Okay, that would be my pleasure. So let us turn to agenda item 3, progress since the second meeting. I would now like to invite the Secretariat to introduce the document related to this agenda item. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Under this agenda item, the Secretariat has
Hello,
prepared
I continue.
document CBD Working Group 2020 3/3/2, which provides an overview of the outcomes of the consultations conducted and other contributions received regarding the preparations of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework since the second meeting of the working group. Thank you, co-chairs.
Thank you, Secretariat. Distinguished delegates, under this agenda item, the document under this item provides an overview of the many activities that have been undertaken since the second meeting. Clearly, a tremendous amount of work has been done by you and many to undertake this. I want to underline the work done by the FAO CBD Global Dialogue on the role of food and agriculture in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework in early July. And we were very pleased to be part of that. Distinguished delegates, my co-chair and I have been informed that some delegation would like to have the opportunity to update the working group on their activities. We will therefore like to open the floor for statement for this item. We will not follow a standard format for the speaker list. Instead, we would like to follow an informal approach and open the floor for a brief 2-minute statement on activities since our second meeting. The floor is now open. If you wish to speak, press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will then be entered into the queue list. When I give you the floor, your microphone will be activated. The status bar will then turn red on your computer and you may start speaking. I see no request for the floor. Secretariat, do you see any? Am I missing something?
No, I don't see any requests for the floor either. Maybe we give 2 more minutes?
Yeah.
Morocco has requested.
Morocco, you have the floor. Vous avez la parole. I am not sure if Morocco's microphone is activé. Le Maroc, est-ce que votre microphone est en fonction?
Morocco, is your microphone on? Is it functioning?
Can somebody assist Morocco in enabling the microphone? Perhaps the device setting on the top left is not adequately set up.
Morocco needs to activate their mic. It's on the upper left-hand corner. maybe we,
Yeah, we're going to need to move on.
yeah.
All right, Marco, we'll come back later, and you always have the opportunity to upload your statement. I understand, is Francis back online? Okay, not yet. Okay.
My microphone is just getting off. It's on. It's off. So right now you can hear me.
Yes.
So there's a big challenge. It's not stable at all.
Okay.
Yes, please continue.
Thank you, colleagues. I hope we've been able to provide you with a good overview of the work we've undertaken since our last meeting in Rome in March 2020. We will now close this agenda item and turn to agenda item 5. Secretariat, do you want to take a break at this point in time, or given the interruption, we may not need that break? Okay, we will dispense with the break and move straight to agenda item 5. So let us now turn our attention to this item on digital sequence information on genetic resources. I will now give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce the document on this item. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. To guide the deliberations on item 5, the Executive Secretary has prepared and made available document CBD / Working Group 2020/3/4 on digital sequence information on genetic resources. In decision 14/20 of the Conference of the Parties committed to working towards resolving their divergence of views regarding benefit sharing from the use of DSI through the process established in the decision. Additionally, the co-chairs of the working group requested the support of the Secretariat in organizing a series of informal activities to further assist parties in resolving the divergence of views. Accordingly, the document contains an overview of the science and policy-based process, which included the convening of the ad hoc technical expert group on DSI and an overview of the informal activities on DSI carried out at the request of the co-chairs. Section 4 of the document proposed elements of a draft recommendations for the consideration of the working group. Additionally, information document CBD/Working Group 2020/3/in/1 provides an update on DSI discussions in relevant ongoing international processes and policy debates. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Thank you. Since this is the first time that digital sequence information on genetic resource will be addressed in a formal meeting since the 14th Conference of the Party, it is important that the formal and informal process and their main conclusion points are presented to allow for equal flow and momentum on the state of play for all parties. In order to provide everyone with the information ahead of discussion, I am inviting Mr. Christopher Lyle of the United Kingdom, co-chair of the ATEG, to give a brief presentation on the report of the ATEG and the point of information. Dear Mr. Lyle, you have the floor. Can the floor be given to Mr. Lyle? I can see A&R Natural History Museum, which I think is Mr. Lyle affiliation.
Hi, moderators, could you give ANR, a Natural History Museum, the floor, please?
Please go ahead. In our Natural History Museum, the system is taking some time, a second to react. So we have to give it some time. Here we go. You should be able to speak now.
Right. Can you now hear me, sir?
Very well. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Co-Chair. So, as has been said, document CBD WG 2020/3/4 includes on pages 7 to 13 a report on the outcomes of the 2020 RTEG on digital sequence information on genetic resources. This is an exact repeat of the section from the RTEG report, which was published last year. Next slide. The first section of the report is on scope of digital sequence information on genetic resources and terminology. In their discussions, the RTEG drew on a study on concept and scope commissioned by the Executive Secretary, noting that DSI had been agreed to be a placeholder term for CBD negotiations. The RTEG concluded that there is no clear boundary between data and information, although the latter could imply more processing than the former. There are different concepts of DSI, more or less inclusive in scope, from the simple order of nucleotides in a strand of DNA to concepts such as natural information or in silico data. The diagram on the slide shows some of these concepts. The degree of biological processing and the proximity to the underlying genetic resource provide a rationale to group information that may comprise digital sequence information. This is shown on the diagram on the slide, which was taken from the study referred to, in which the proximity is less and the degree of biological processing greater as one moves from left to right along the diagram, from the genetic resource to the nucleotides, DNA and RNA that encode the genetic information, to the proteins that are coded by the DNA and RNA, to the cellular metabolites that result from protein degradation and transformation. Next slide. This is captured in the report, and the table from the report is reproduced here. The RTEG proposed 3 groups of biochemicals that might be considered DSI, so that negotiations could be conducted with greater clarity. Group 1 is the nucleotides, DNA and RNA. Group 2 includes Group 1, but also gene expression, proteins with amino acid sequence data in the protein, the structure of those proteins, and epigenetic modification, where heritable modification is passed from descendants outside the genes. Group 3 includes 1 and 2, and also wider information on the biochemical composition of the genetic resource, including metabolites. The RTEG identified options for terminology to describe each group, which you find in the report, but did not propose that any particular option be used. Instead, it used groups 1 to 3 in its report. The RTEG agreed that these 3 groups of genetic and biochemical information could be considered as digital sequence information. It considered that associated information, as summarized in the right-hand column of the table, and including associated traditional knowledge, is not digital sequence information. It did discuss the importance and relevance of associated traditional knowledge, and recalled that there are obligations to share benefits from the utilization of associated traditional knowledge under the Nagoya Protocol and the CBD. Next slide. The ARTEC then discussed the potential implications arising from these groups, particularly with regard to traceability, use of DSI and technologies enabled by DSI in life science research and in processes, on the International Nuclear Sequence Data Collaboration, INSDC, on open exchange and use of DSI, and on measures governing access, benefit sharing, and compliance. This is necessary. Many implications depend on the benefit approach adopted. Some potential implications were not discussed in depth, but could benefit from further information or consideration. Value understood. Some experts does not necessarily mean free and unrestricted access.
I think we seem to have lost Chris.
Mr. Lai, can you hear us?
Maybe I could ask the secretariat to take over.
Please do so.
Yeah. Tauko or Charlotta, could you take over from here, please? Thank you.
Lisa, to possibly show me the slide before so I can catch up exactly where Dr. Lyle was. Thank you. And you can go back to the slide. And so I will read the text. So the ATEC then discussed the potential implication arising from these groups, particularly in regards to traceability, use of DSI and technologies enabled by DSI in life sciences research and innovation processes, on the International Nucleotide Sequence Database Collaboration, INSDC, on open exchange and use of DSI, and on measures governing access, benefit sharing, and compliance. These discussions were necessarily preliminary, and many of the implications depend on the benefit sharing approach adopted. Some potential implications were not discussed in depth, but could benefit from further information or consideration. With regards to traceability, the experts reiterated the value of open access to data, although some experts noted open does not necessarily mean free and unrestricted access. Ways to improve traceability were discussed, including linking internationally recognized certificates of compliance, IRCCs, to data uploaded to the INSDC. They noted that traceability is potentially easier for Group 1 than for the other groups. Overall, traceability is more or less relevant depending on the benefit sharing approach adopted. For example, bilateral versus multilateral. Next slide, please. Finally, the ATEC discussed capacity building, emphasizing its importance, including the capability of countries to develop endogenous research and identify, understand, monitor, and manage their own biodiversity. It was suggested that such capacity building should be integrating integrated in broader capacity building initiatives and strategies. And there is a need for appropriate funding and support for development and maintenance of scientific infrastructure. Next slide. I think I got mixed up in the slides. And next slide. Thank you. So I just covered that. And next slide is the last one. Thank you. The experts tend to identify key stakeholders for capacity building related to DSI, making it clear that these included not only those in research organizations, but also those in government and regulatory bodies, and indigenous people and local communities. The experts also identified key areas for potential capacity building and various modalities for capacity building activities. And I believe that is the end of the presentation. Thank you. Apologies for the mix-up with the slide.
Merci, Madame Germain-Aubray. Nous comprenons tout à fait les difficultés et vous remercions.
Thank you, Madam. We understand the difficulty that you've had, and thank you for having helped us.
Was not up to what it should be. I would like now to hear about the informal process on DSI. Originally, my co-chair Francis was planning to make that presentation. However, I'm going to... Okay,
Just
you're there? All right. Over to you, Francis, for that presentation now.
Yes, co-chair. I will try. If I get off, then you can continue from there. So thank you, Christopher. You faced some challenges. This internet is not really giving us good time today. Thank you, Secretariat. I would like just now to go briefly on the informal process that took place during this time. So you can go to the next slide, where I'll begin by basically the next slide, please. I'll begin by highlighting the key decisions or the key elements of decision 1420 on digital sequence information, DSI on genetic resources. One of it is that actually DSI may not be the most appropriate term and therefore used only as a placeholder until alternative term is agreed. The other is that DSI on genetic resources for the three objectives of the convention is very important in that aspect, but that further work is needed to provide conceptual clarity on DSI on genetic resources, capacity to access, use, generate, analyze DSI on genetic resources is needed in many countries, that some parties have adopted domestic measures that regulate access to and use of DSI on genetic resources as part of their ABS framework. There is, of course, divergence of views among parties regarding benefit sharing arising from the use of DSI on genetic resources. Parties, other governments, IPLCs, relevant stakeholders and organizations were requested to submit their views and information on DSI on genetic resources, especially on that area covering clarity of the concept, terminology, scope of DSI on genetic resources, how domestic measures on ABS consider DSI on genetic resources,
Dear
and benefit share.
Francis, could you speak louder?
You can't hear me?
I'm being told that the interpreters are having trouble following you.
Hello, can they hear me now?
Interpreter, is that better?
Can they hear me?
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm being told this is working now. Please go ahead.
The concept, terminology, scope of DSI on genetic resources, how domestic measures on ABS consider DSI on genetic resources, but also benefits sharing arising from the commercial and non-commercial use of DSI on genetic resources. And it's also stated in the same decision that the open-ended working group will consider the outcome of ATEC and to make recommendations to COP15 on how to address DSI on genetic resources in the context of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Now, the other decision I want to touch on is decision 1434. That is for the preparation of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Paragraph 21 says COP takes note of decision 1420 on DSI on genetic resources. And then the other decision also I would like to draw your attention to is COPMOP decision 312, which says that DSI on genetic resources, again, that the open-ended working group will submit the outcomes of its discussion for consideration by COPMOP for the Nagoya Protocol. Next slide. That is at the fourth meeting of the Nagoya Protocol. Now here you will see the timeline of the intersessional process on DSI. We can see here the formal process as reflected. However, you will see the large arrow that actually shows you the effect that the pandemic has had on the process. We cannot go ahead with the meeting after the meeting of the ATEC. As such, and in order to keep the momentum from the ATEC on DSI, we, the co-chairs of the working group on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, decided to facilitate some information sharing and informal discussion on DSI. In time given last year and this year, we decided to take advantage of the numerous studies and dialogues happening everywhere, harness the information, advances, and reflections, and share them with parties and stakeholders. The idea of these events was to present information in the most meaningful way, simply a compilation of facts to facilitate learning processes of the parties. Next slide, please. So we had a series of webinars on DSI, which started from November 2020 to April 2021, as well as a forum which was open to all. In partnership with the ABS Capacity Development Initiative, the first webinar covered the technical and scientific basis of DSI. The second webinar was a presentation of the 4 studies and the ATEC report that Dr. Quiz unfortunately will not give us the full presentation, but the secretary stepped in on your part. Next slide. So I would like now to draw your attention to some of the options that came out of the process. The policy options and the solutions as it were, that we now want to present. Option 0.
Tauco and Charlotta, perhaps you could take over right now, please.
Microphone. The parties have, if we look at the option 0, status quo, parties have not yet agreed on how to address ABS for DSI, and then some parties may decide to include measures on access to DSI and or benefit sharing from DSI as part of the domestic ABS system, whereas others may consider to open access to DSI in databases to be sufficient form of non-monetary benefit sharing. Option 2 that has been generated is regarding DSI that is fully integrated into the CBD and the Nagoya Protocol on ABS. In such a case, ABS is subject to each country's legislation, and therefore the PIC and MAT may be required depending on the national legislation. The utilization of DSI is to be regulated by MAT, as are benefit sharing obligations. If we look at option 2, there will be then the standard MAT. This recognizes the obligation to share benefits from the use of DSI, but in a way that is not linked to the access to DSI itself, given that there is no PIC or prior informed consent. Since MAT is standardized, there is no need for individual negotiation of a contract for each DSI utilization, but one or limited number of standard contracts. And under this option 2, there are sub-options, 2.1, where each country has a standard material transfer agreement, or each country therefore establishes one or limited number of MATs with which users need to comply with where obligations to share benefits is triggered. Option 2.2 is that standard MAT at the international level exists. Benefit sharing is addressed at the international level as opposed to going through each country's national system under option 2.1. One or more standard licenses are agreed upon, and the terms and conditions depend on the license attached to the DSI. Next slide, please. Option 3 is in a case where there is no PIC and when there is no MAT. This option requires a payment or contribution to go into a multilateral fund, and it avoids the need for tracing the origin of the genetic resource from which the DSI was extracted, or the need to monitor the downstream utilization of the product or services derived from DSI. Under this option, there are also, again, 2 sub-options. Option 1 being payment for access to DSI. This could be by requiring membership fee for access to DSI databases, or to require a very small payment for access to individual DSI in the database. Option 3.2 refers to other payments, deals with option to make payments and contributions through a multilateral fund for benefit sharing from the use of DSI. For example, payment for DSI-related services such as storage, processing, expertise, and analysis of sequences offered in return for a payment. Other forms of payment may include levies on products or services associated with DSI. Option 4 looks at the enhanced technical and scientific contribution. Under this option, technical and scientific cooperation becomes a systematic and mandated part of the DSI policy. This could take the form of research collaboration, training, knowledge platforms, technology transfer, and technology co-development. Option 5 is on benefit sharing from DSI, and this option does not consider that benefit sharing from the use of DSI from genetic resources is necessary, and thus no mechanism is proposed to be implemented. Next slide. Then the informal process continued to look at what criteria could be considered for these policy options. And the first criteria is a fair and equitable sharing of benefits from the use of DSI from genetic resources. The benefits from the use of DSI coming from genetic resources should be fairly and equitably shared. The next one criteria is on open data, aiming that data access aims at data access, not as an impediment to scientific research or innovation. Third one is contribution conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. And the fourth one is on linking across biodiversity regimes and international forums or linkages. The fifth criteria is financial visibility of monetary benefit sharing. And the sixth one is that whatever we do should be a simplicity of solution. Next slide. So we have submitted this to you as the outcomes of the informal process, and we hope that parties and other stakeholders will take this information into consideration as they go through their deliberation on this agenda item. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat, and thank you, Francis, for this useful presentation. We would now like to open the floor for intervention on agenda item 5. I will start with regional groups, followed by parties, other governments, and observers. I will encourage you to keep your statement short and concise. We will now start with regional groups. Malawi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Malawi is taking the floor on behalf of Africa. Africa welcomes the opportunity to reflect on the outcomes of the science and policy processes undertaken formally and informally to assist parties with addressing DSI in the context of the post-2020 biodiversity framework. Africa considers this meeting as an opportunity towards finding the much needed resources to support the required transformational change in our bid to save biodiversity from continued loss and enhance its sustainable management use. For Africa, it is a red line that the post-2020 biodiversity framework must include a solution and not just a process on benefit sharing for the use of digital sequence information. As the Convention's third objective, fair and equitable benefit sharing has a crucial role in resource mobilization and in the implementation logic of the Convention's three objectives, which will be undermined if we do not deal with the issue of how benefits arising from the use of open access DSI should be shared fairly and equitably. Africa proposes that any monetary benefits arising or resulting from all utilization of genetic resources, which we understand to mean using biological resources and biodiversity in any form or shape, should be collected through a 1% markup on retail sales of consumer goods that arise from the use of genetic resources in developed countries in accordance with Article 20 and 15.7 of the Convention, and only in cases where the bilateral prior informed consent and mutually agreed term system is not implementable or practicable. We want to state very clearly that this proposal does not mean to be a replacement of the bilateral system of access and benefit sharing, but complementary to it. The funds raised from this 1% markup would be deposited in a global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism administered by the Global Environmental Facility as the financial mechanism of the CBD. Funds would then be distributed through a competitive, project-based approach to support implementation of on-the-ground conservation and sustainable use of activities of by indigenous peoples and local communities and others, guided by scientific advice from the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES. Africa acknowledges that access to DSI is useful for research relating to conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, but it is also used for many commercial applications, resulting in commercial products. Technical capacity to generate access and use DSI is still low in most African countries, and therefore the benefits of having open access are not fairly or equitably available to all. Africa considers it unacceptable that DSI created from genetic resources under its sovereign control can later be used commercially without any fair and equitable benefit sharing. In the absence of a clear global multilateral procedure for sharing the benefits arising from the use of DSI, the African region in particular, and other developing countries in general will have no choice but to use ABS contracts to prevent users from uploading DSI into open access databases that do not have terms and conditions, or do not make best efforts to identify the providing country and ensure that the benefits are shared with the providing country. With that said, Africa wishes to indicate that we'll be making specific textual proposals in the contact group on a number of issues, but we have already submitted these points through the uploading forum. In terms of the actual textual proposals, since I still have time, Africa welcomes the draft recommendations provided in document CBD Working Group 2020/34 with the following amendments. For paragraph A, Africa would like it to read as to recognize the need for a global standard or policy approach that encourages open access to DSI and promotes significant scientific research and innovation related to DSI. We have also made some textual proposals with regards to paragraph B, as well as some textual proposals and comments on the annexes that have been provided. Considering the time limitations, I'll just let this be submitted in writing. However, turning to the identified criteria, we also have considered it, and we welcome the criteria, and we have provided some comments on that in writing as well. Africa finally would like to relate that its red line position is that the post-2020 GBF must contain a solution for sharing the benefits arising from the use of DSI. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Malawi. On behalf of Africa, I will now give the floor to the European Union. European Union, I understand you will be speaking about on behalf of your region.
Good afternoon. I'm not sure my camera works, but even then, I would like to speak on behalf of the EU, its member states, and we would like to reaffirm our commitment to continue the DSI discussions. We attach great importance to it in the ongoing negotiations of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and look forward to a constructive discussion at Open-Ended Working Group 3. As we have seen from the presentations by the Secretariat, DSI is not a specific term defined either in the CBD or the Nagoya Protocol. In the light of the diversity of terms used in the scientific world, for our discussions, DSI only serves as a placeholder for the duration. The EU and its member states wish to recall that the generation of access to analysis and use of DSI can have important positive effects on the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. Therefore, how we deal with this issue can play a role in the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. We believe that the global pandemic caused by COVID-19 has also highlighted the important role of DSI in the protection of human, animal, and plant health. Timely and unrestricted access to and sharing of such data has proven to be essential for the rapid development of detection tools and effective responses to threat to public health. We should bear in mind this lesson learned. We wish to express our appreciation to the work done on DSI in the intersessional period. In particular, we welcome the outcomes of the ATEC, which brought more clarity to the different possible understandings of the term DSI and its scope, as well as of the possible implications of any of those understandings. The EU and its member states notice that we still need to deepen the analysis of the options for dealing with DSI that have been put forward. As also recalled in the DSI note by the Executive Secretary, the informal discussion forum was a collection of personal opinions and observations. Not only do we need to build a common understanding on the options and relevant criteria, but we also need to prepare a solid analysis of the benefits and costs of their implementation. With the view to keeping the DSI discussion on a pragmatic level, we welcome the separation made between access to DSI and possible sharing of benefits from DSI utilization. We would like to stress that the principle of open access to DSI must be preserved, and thus any possible future solution to a DSI should not lead to hindering open access to DSI, nor negatively affect the open science model. Rather, as highlighted by the ATEC report, any approach to DSI should incentivize the use of DSI and avoid unnecessary monitoring, tracing, and tracking requirements, which would greatly reduce the cost effectiveness of a possible solution. Would like to recall that public or open access databases are promoted and maintained by considerable public funding. Data published in those databases are the results of the work of researchers that is made available for free and contribute to the exchange and generation of additional information and knowledge worldwide. Therefore, public databases and open access to the data are an important form of non-monetary data benefit sharing. We acknowledge that many countries still lack capacity to generate, access, analyze, and use DSI. This limits the possibility of taking advantage of these benefits to their full potential, hampers international scientific research, and also hinders the successful implementation of the CBD objectives. We therefore wish to reiterate our support for further development of DSI capacity by all parties. In this context, we would like to highlight that open access to data, as well as the development and publication of tools to analyze them, are the basis of several education and scientific research projects carried out in the framework of development cooperation by the EU and its member states with other parties. This cooperation also contributes to building DSI capacity in those countries and their research entities. The exploratory work done in this intersessional period has shown that DSI is used by many different sectors, businesses, and for different purposes. We've also learned that very rarely does one single sequence data alone lead to a commercial application. Typically, some sequences contribute to an application, some sequences contribute to several applications, and some may never contribute to an application. Consequently, it is extremely difficult to assess the added value of one single sequence to a final outcome or product. The real value lies in the possibility to aggregate and compare a multitude of data. Therefore, the way DSI is typically used significantly differs from the traditional understanding of the utilization of genetic resources under the Nagoya Protocol. We recognize that conditions for generating and using DSI can already be specified in MAT when genetic resources from which DSI was obtained was accessed. We'd like to recall that the ATEC highlighted the importance of having legal certainty regarding the usage of DSI for all sectors, and therefore that any approach to handling DSI should provide legal certainty. If you grant me a couple of 1 or 2 minutes more, I will finish quickly, Co-Chair. The EU and its member states would therefore like to reaffirm that any potential DSI solution should preserve open access to DSI from databases, be practical, easily implementable, efficient, and cost-effective, i.e. it should generate more benefits than costs. Ensure that the benefits generated will contribute to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity in support of the SDGs, be future-proof to allow technological developments to be addressed, and be adaptable to the requirements of other ABS instruments, including possible future instruments. In addition, we note that most of the studies on potential modalities for benefit sharing show that the multilateral approach seems in principle better suited and more efficient for DSI than the bilateral model. Finally, we think that the ongoing discussion on DSI as well as on ABS in the context of GBF offer an opportunity to improve the implementation of ABS, and it is thus important to place the work on the DSI in the overall context of the post-20 GBF. Document CBD-WG 2020/3/4 provides a useful compilation of the knowledge that has been generated over the last years, but it doesn't provide a clear basis for operational conclusions yet. We are ready to work further on this in these 2 weeks, and we will make textual suggestions on the draft recommendations in the contact group. Thank you very much, and apologies for taking too much time here. Thank you.
Thank you, European Union. I see that Saudi Arabia has their hand up. Well, before getting into your intervention, are you speaking on behalf of your region or as an individual party?
Individual party.
So hold on for a second. I'll just ask if there is, is there any other individual, regional statement to be made? So as we're completed statement by region, I will move now to intervention by the parties, and we'll start with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, you have the floor.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this meeting confirms the commitment of the international commitment to the ambitious goals in order to reduce the loss of biodiversity and to accomplish sustainable development. Since we are going to focus in this meeting about DSI as it relates to genetic resources, we need to seize this opportunity to double our efforts in order to have mechanisms that are appropriate for this important topic. Therefore, the delegation of my country welcomes the outcome of the meeting of the AHTIG on DSI regarding genetic resources as in the first annex of the current document. We believe that following this methodology or any methodology for dealing with DSI regarding genetic resources should specify a particular mechanism for access to DSI when it comes to scientific research and renovation. We also emphasize that the benefits arising from the use of digital sequence information regarding genetic resources should be shared in an equitable and fair way, and to consider the possible means of benefit sharing. Therefore, the delegation of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia also emphasizes the pressing need for capacity building in order to address digital sequence information regarding genetic resources. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Shukran, Saudi Arabia. I will now pass the floor to Colombia, followed by Indonesia and Korea. Colombia, you have the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Colombia wishes to thank the Secretariat and the co-chairs for drawing up this working document, which we consider is a very good compilation on what has happened in the ATEG and also in the discussions in the different seminars on DSI, which is, of course, is a matter of national interest for Colombia as one of the most mega diverse countries in the world. Therefore, Colombia recalls and reaffirms the agreed text in Decision 14/20 about the need to resolve existing divergence of views regarding access and benefit sharing from the use of DSI, and in particular, that this is a matter that we should address within the framework of the CBD through a science-based approach in order to fulfill the third objective of the Convention and its Article 15. Turning now to document CBD-WG 2023/4, Colombia has the following three initial comments to make. First of all, the text is based on a large quantity of technical information, and in order to make it easier to understand this, we suggest that more information should be given under the background section, or else we should have a summary of this information for decision makers. Secondly, it's vital to agree on a definition to replace the term DSI, which is why we are very grateful to have received tables 1 and 2 in Annex 1. We consider that the groups identified form a good basis for the negotiations. Thirdly, turning to Annex 2 on policy options, Colombia has the following comments to make. First of all, we have to manage to make progress in resolving divergences to avoid option 0 being the only viable option. Then options 2.1 and 2.2, there we see these as halfway points that would help discussions. Turning now to option 3.1, 3.2, these could be useful in cases where it is not possible to identify the origin of the DSI. Nevertheless, not all benefits that may be derived from the use of digital sequences are monetary benefits, and more information is required about the conditions under which the multilateral fund would actually operate. Option 4, that could be complementary to the bilateral and multilateral options, but it should not be considered as one single policy option. Option 5 should not be considered as an option, given that evidence has already shown the relevance of DSI for fulfillment of the Convention and its close link to genetic resources. And finally, co-chair, to address DSI on genetic resources, we could consider excluding them from ABS of genetic resource provisions when dealing with uses related to scientific research, and only apply ABS provisions to these sequences when they are being used for bioprospecting, commercial or industrial purposes. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Colombia. I will now give the floor to Indonesia, followed by Korea and Malaysia. Indonesia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me clearly?
Very well.
First, Indonesia would like to express its appreciation to the CBD Secretariat and Chair of SAPSTA, CBD, and also co-chair of Open-Ended Working Group for developing the first draft of Post-2020 GBF and the DSI document. Indonesia would also like to thank the ATEC on DSI on genetic resources for delivering the report. The development of several groups covering the scope of DSI is very important to ensure legal clarity for future use of DSI. Indonesia understands the importance of terminology in technology development. Database management, data openness, and data sharing is important to monitor the achievement of Post-2020 GBF and the global data platform that is accessible and can be accessed anytime and anywhere. Nevertheless, open cannot be directly mean and does not necessarily mean unrestricted. A good policy and management need to be formulated to reach a common understanding without halting scientific research and development. Chair, Indonesia would like to emphasize the importance of technical and scientific cooperations, technology transfer, access to technology, and technology co-development as part of the DSI policy. This will ensure the democratize the access and the use of DSI, making it more equitable and mutual so that each country has the capacity and opportunity to access and use DSI to its full potential. Capacity building on DSI is relevant and necessary for addressing DSI. In addition, implementing transfer technology and knowledge in a mutual collaboration is necessary to be enhanced and facilitated. Indonesia believes that all countries, especially high technology countries, need to fully understand that there would be no biotechnology development without biodiversity data. Vice versa, biodiversity data will lack its means without technology. Therefore, the definition and scope of DSI must reflect all forms of data related to biodiversity and also anticipate the future development in science and technology. Chair, Indonesia also would like to stress the linkage of DSI with the Nagoya Protocol and its relation to the CBD objective, particularly regarding the direction of potential commercial use of DSI. Benefit sharing from the use of DSI of genetic resources is necessary. Thus, the mechanism to address this is proposed to be in place. Lastly, Indonesia has several other specific comments on the document. We will submit it in writing to the Secretariat, mainly on clarity on the terminology used in scope of DSI, additional words in paragraph 27, A and D, and also on annexes 1 and 2 and 3, and also Indonesia support option 4 in annex 2. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Indonesia. I will now give the floor to Korea, followed by Malaysia and Australia. Korea, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Before I get started, the Republic of Korea would like to appreciate the hard and excellent work of Secretariat and ad hoc technical expert group on digital sequence information on genetic resources. First of all, Korea believes that DSI is not within the scope of Convention on Biological Diversity because DSI itself is not a tangible physical material, but intangible information in the context of genetic resources. However, Korea is willing to engage in the negotiations on DSI issues with an open mind on the following understandings. First, Korea would like to point out that considering the outcome report of attack on digital sequence information on genetic resources, the use of the term DSI is not appropriate because the meaning of or scope of the term DSI is too broad. Korea believes that the broader scope of DSI makes it more difficult to find solutions to DSI issues, and accordingly, these ongoing negotiations could get all the more difficult and complicated. Therefore, Korea suggests using the term genetic sequence data instead of DSI. Second, Korea believes that the genetic sequence data in the public data bank, such as INSDC, do not be subject to any access obligations or restrictions, because it is already in the public domain or publicly available, therefore cannot be regulated in reality. In this context, Korea has a strong view that the open access approach will maximize the opportunities to access and use DSI and facilitate the innovation and scientific research. Finally, recalling paragraph 6 of decision CBD/decision/decision/14/20 with the aim of strengthening the fulfillment of the third objective of the Convention and Article 15, paragraph 7, Korea hopes this meeting will contribute to resolving the divergence of views among parties regarding DSI. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Korea. I will now give the floor to Malaysia, followed by Australia and Japan. Malaysia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Distinguished delegates, Malaysia considers that there has been much progress in our understanding of DSI since COP14. However, it remains to be Malaysia's position that DSI must come under the scope of the Nagoya Protocol. There is no doubt that the field of biotechnology has advanced exponentially in the past few decades. However, this advancement, especially of synthetic biology, must be in tandem with the willingness of the CPD parties to ensure equity and fairness to developing parties. This can only be guaranteed by recognizing that DSI is information that is sensitive to commercialization and commercialization that potentially ignores the community, state, and country of origins. The potential complexity before us must not negate the need to recognize DSI in all frameworks to be agreed by the CPD parties, including the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Malaysia has taken a proactive step by ensuring that DSI comes under the definition of biological resource in Access and Benefit Sharing Act 2017. We would like to end our intervention by expressing our willingness to explore the modalities put forth by the ad hoc technical expert group, ATEC, and look forward to the discussion in the contact group. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Malaysia. I will now give the floor to Australia, followed by Japan, and then Mexico. Australia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Australia thanks the Secretariat for developing paper CBD-WG 2020/3/4 on digital sequence information on genetic resources. Australia broadly supports the elements of a recommendation outlined in the paper. However, as stated by the EU, more work is needed to develop a practical and effective path forward for how DSI can sit within the CBD. As both a global provider and user of both genetic resources and the DSI arising from their utilisation, Australia is a firm believer in the global benefit of sharing DSI, and that this should underpin how DSI is incorporated into the CBD and the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We are committed to the principles of open science, while recognising that there are current inequities in the capacity to access, use and benefit from open access DSI. In this context, we also note the importance of capacity building in addressing these inequities. Genetic resource and DSI providers and users seek legal certainty, simplicity and clarity. Any benefit sharing mechanism established for DSI must maintain open access arrangements to ensure the availability and efficient transfer of information for use in science, medicine and innovation development. Any proposed compliance model for DSI must have simple certification processes, provide legal certainty for users, be user-friendly, and not require the development of new domestic legislation to implement. It must also be self-funded, with revenue generated by the system used to cover the cost of the system's upkeep, with no additional finances required by party governments. Australia looks forward to constructive discussions on DSI over the coming week. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Thank you, Australia. I will now give the floor to Japan, followed by Mexico and Namibia. Japan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. First, a discussion on so-called DSI should be based on its merit, scientific evidence, and actual use. For Japan, this is a technical matter that requires technical discussion, and thus should not be subject to a packaged political deal involving linkages with post-2020 GBF and resource mobilization. Politicized debate on DSI are unproductive in facilitating conservation of biological diversity. Second, we firmly believe that free and open access to DSI has greatly contributed to the conservation of biodiversity and related scientific innovations, the most recent example being the rapid development of COVID-19 vaccines through quick sharing of necessary information. Any approach to address DSI should in no way restrict open and free access to DSI or hinder scientific research and innovation. We view any attempt to directly monetize the access and use of DSI as creating unnecessary disruptions to scientific development with negative implication to non-monetary benefit sharing, which the world enjoys today. Co-Chair, thirdly, we do not believe that work entrusted under COP Decision 14/20 provides grounds to establish that DSI is within the scope of the Convention and the Protocol. For Japan, DSI is not part of the definition of genetic resources under the Convention, and the Convention has no ability to overstep into the bounds of contractual freedom between provider and user who enter into agreement on mutually agreed terms which are confidential. Therefore, we do not support any idea or proposal that seeks to control and monetize the use of DSI, which has no basis in the Convention and Protocol. Fourthly, we also know that CBD discourse on DSI should be conducted within the confines of Decision 14/20. However, what we see in the preceding document is based on informal discussions on policy options and online discussion forums, which the COP simply did not mandate and is thus questionable from a procedural point of view. Substantively, discussion there include ideas which go far beyond the legal framework and basic principles of the Convention and the Protocol. As such, we are not in a position to take note of the information in the document to make it a basis for further consultations. We will provide a specific suggestion in writing. Thank you. We will engage the discussion constructively. Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. I will now give the floor to Mexico, followed by Ethiopia, and then the United Arab Emirates. Mexico, you have the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Mexico is grateful for the review of the work carried out on the issue of digital sequence information on genetic resources. We believe that it is necessary to underline that digital sequences are an intrinsic and indissoluble component of the physical genetic resource, and it is therefore important to take into consideration that there should be fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising from the use of genetic resources, bearing in mind that the provider country of the physical genetic resource, which is the source of the DSI on the genetic resources, should be the main beneficiary. In this respect, we need to highlight the relevance of mega-diverse countries as providers of genetic resources and, by extension, as providers also of the diversity of DSI on genetic resources. Recognition of the origin of the physical resource is fundamental, regardless of how the digital sequences are obtained. Namely, it does not matter whether it is obtained from a collection or a deposit in a collection outside of the country of origin or from database platforms. We recognize the value of digital sequence information on genetic resources for scientific research being pursued for various purposes, such as those related to public health. However, in order to avoid misappropriation of genetic resources, it is important to underscore that this research should be based on good research practices, ethical commitments, and compliance with national and international legislation. We emphasize the urgent need to implement effective traceability mechanisms, paying particular attention to public and private database platforms, so that these mechanisms ensure knowledge of the origin of the genetic resources from which the DSI on genetic resources has been obtained. Fair and equitable benefit sharing lies at the very core of the Nagoya Protocol, and thus the monetary and non-monetary benefits arising from access to and use of digital sequences should reach IPLCs that play a central role in the generation and conservation of biodiversity through traditional knowledge. Given this, it is fundamental that we choose an access policy that contemplates full and effective participation of IPLCs, as well as free, prior, informed consent under mutually agreed terms, avoiding any option in which countries would lose their jurisdiction over their genetic resources and the associated DSI. Finally, we must bear in mind that synthetic biology techniques can be used to generate so-called similar sequences to those of a genetic resource, and these have impacts that affect the fundamental principles of the Nagoya Protocol, which is why we absolutely have to apply the precautionary approach and strict biosafety regulations. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Mexico.
Thank you very much to Mexico.
I will now recognize Ethiopia, followed by the United Arab Emirates, and followed by Namibia. Ethiopia, you have the floor.
Ethiopia supports statements made by the government of Malawi on behalf of African region.
I'm afraid it sounds like we've lost Ethiopia. So, Ethiopia, are you able to engage?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Ethiopia supports statement made by the government of Malawi on behalf of African region. Ethiopia is highly grateful to the Secretariat of CBD and the co-chairs of Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework for establishing a take and producing a document of DSI on genetic resource. We also thank European Union and the government of Norway for their financial support for commissioning 4 studies on this issue, and the government of Colombia for hosting this meeting. Ethiopia believes that benefits resulting from the use of DSI on genetic resource should be shared fairly and equitably to enhance the third objective of the CBD. Ethiopia is in support of the view that any approach or the modality that intended to address DSI should not hinder scientific research and innovation. Further, Ethiopia would like to remind that there should be an appropriate capacity development program in place to sufficiently and effectively address issues of DSI. There should also be a clear recommendation on tangible modalities or approach of benefit sharing that arises from the use of DSI on genetic resource, which demands further consultation and analysis by ATEG before COP15. We have a phase in that our previous experience from the negotiations and implementation of Nagoya Protocol as a learned lesson may prevent the delay in the potential use of DSI for biodiversity conservation and its integration into the post-2020 biodiversity framework. Finally, Ethiopia believes the significance of passport data in traceability of DSI on genetic resources that should be meaningful when benefit sharing is taken into consideration. I thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Ethiopia. I will now give the floor to the United Arab Emirates, followed by Namibia, and then the United Kingdom. United Arab Emirates, you have the floor.
سيد الرئيس، في البداية تتقدم دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة بجزيل الشكر للأمينة التنفيذية.
At the outset, the UAE would like to extend its thanks to the Executive Secretary and the thanks to the Secretariat for its effort to build the capacity of parties through the holding of a number of workshops on DSI on genetic resources. We would like to stress the importance of DSI for the purpose of scientific research and for the use of synthetic biology. We have to conserve biodiversity, of course, and we would like to stress that the access to the synthetic biology and DSI on genetic resources leads to the improvement and the enhancement of creativity and innovation and scientific research, in addition to the food security and the improvement of public health. On another note, DSI is used in other sectors, and in the case where restrictive measures would take place, this would indeed hinder the scientific research. Technological advances, including the use of DSI on genetic resources, contribute to the securing the achievement of the goals of CBD. As for Nagoya Protocol, we need a more profound understanding of DSI on genetic resources, as well as the access and benefit sharing. When discussing DSI on genetic resources within the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, we have to be extremely cautious as to the steps to be undertaken, that especially that such steps would hinder our progress, and especially in regards to the fulfilling of the purposes and goals of the Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing. DSI on genetic resources and the access thereto may be hindered by the non-existence of the necessary capacity. Therefore, we stress on the need to develop the capacity of parties to have access to DSI on genetic resources in such a way that parties would all be able to achieve the goals and targets of our convention. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Give the floor to Namibia, followed by the United Kingdom, and then Costa Rica. Namibia, you have the floor.
Mr. Co-Chair, can you hear me?
We can hear you well.
Thank you very much. Namibia supports the intervention made by Malawi on behalf of Africa and would like to emphasize a few important points. Firstly, that it's completely unthinkable for the post-2020 global biodiversity framework to be adopted without a solution on how to share the benefits rising from the use of DSI. Doing so would demonstrate beyond doubt that the CBD has failed to keep up with the times. We simply cannot ignore the predominant technology that is nowadays used in the utilization of genetic resources. Secondly, that it would be impossible to develop a GBF that balances all three objectives of the CBD without also agreeing on how to share DSI benefits. The CBD is not primarily or only a conservation instrument. It is a balanced grand global bargain adopted in Rio 30 years ago to balance the urgent global need for biodiversity conservation with the legitimate development aspirations of developing countries by using benefit sharing and technology transfer to create alternative green development pathways that do not rely on the destruction of nature, to raise people out of poverty and provide them with decent and sustainable livelihoods. Thirdly, that the dismal failure of the CBD to meet any of its strategic goals thus far is largely due to its failure to mobilize adequate resources for the implementation of agreed goals and targets. Fair and equitable benefit sharing has a critical role to play in raising millions of dollars needed to achieve the goals and the CBD objectives. If we want to bend the curve on biodiversity loss, we absolutely need a new deal for people and nature that obliges those who make private profit from the use of biodiversity to contribute to its conservation and sustainable use by sharing monetary benefits at the scale required. Finally, that the development and adoption of the GBF presents a once-in-a-generation chance, in fact, probably our last realistic chance, to bring about the transformational change needed if we are to live in harmony with nature by 2050. Mr. Co-Chair, let's all join together in saying biodiversity needs to be paid for by those who make money from it. No more free riders, no more using spurious arguments to restrict benefit sharing. The time for a global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism has come. Let us put it in the GBF and move forward together in hope and determined action to save the natural world before it's too late. To contribute to our further discussions, the African group has, in the statement made by Malawi, submitted written comments, including the proposal we made during SBI 3 and the discussion on Article 10 on the application of a global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism to the thorny question of DSI. We believe such a holistic approach will actually meet most of the criteria that have been identified for the DSI solution. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Namibia. I will now like to give the floor to the United Kingdom, followed by Costa Rica, and then Switzerland. United Kingdom, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The United Kingdom is committed to supporting ambitious global action to bend the curve of biodiversity loss by 2030. In this context, the UK recognises the critical importance of finding a solution to the issue of benefit sharing in relation to digital sequence information.
Sorry, United Kingdom. Can you get closer to your microphone? You seem to be moving in and out.
Sorry, is this any better?
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. The United Kingdom is committed to supporting ambitious global action to bend the curve of biodiversity loss by 2030. In this context, the The UK recognises the critical importance of finding a solution to the issue of benefit sharing in relation to digital sequence information on genetic resources. We are confident that such a solution can be found. Despite the delay to the formal discussions on DSI resulting from the pandemic, good progress has been made through informal discussions between parties, industry, the scientific community, and other stakeholders. And we would like to thank South Africa and Norway for co-hosting the global dialogue on DSI. Continuing discussions with all these groups will be essential to make further progress, and the UK is looking forward to building on the good work that has already been done. We would also like to thank the Executive Secretary for the note prepared ahead of this meeting, including the proposed elements of a draft recommendation. We take note of the outcomes of the meeting of the ATEC, recognising that some discussions have progressed since that group was able to meet, and that the outcomes represent a range of views from the experts in attendance. The possible elements of a recommendation, as presented in the note, provide a helpful basis for discussion. We believe that open access to DSI must be a key component of any solution, and we would like, therefore, to see that language strengthened. Any approach must ensure that open access is maintained and facilitates research and innovation. The UK also recognises that where benefits arise, they should be shared fairly and equitably, and we are ready to engage in discussions on possible approaches to ensuring that. Finally, the UK believes that capacity building is also essential. It must deliver against the needs of parties and stakeholders, levelling the playing field and ensuring that DSI can be accessed and used globally. We will submit our text suggestions to the Secretariat in writing. If we are truly to seize the opportunity presented by this COP, the UK firmly believes that our agreements must be supported by the mobilisation of resources from all sources. The UK has already, for example, committed that over the next 5 years, we will spend more than $4 billion internationally on nature. We strongly recognise the role that benefit sharing could play in contributing further to mobilising the resources necessary, including those mobilised through the application of DSI on genetic resources. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, United Kingdom. I will now give the floor to Costa Rica, followed by Switzerland, et ensuite le Maroc. Costa Rica, you now have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Co-Chair. There's a great deal of interference on the line for Mr. Francis's mic, unfortunately. Thank you. Costa Rica has actively participated in the informal discussions on digital sequence information. We thank the Secretariat and other actors for organising these activities, which have allowed us to move forward with analysis of this subject. Costa Rica believes that DSI is directly linked to genetic resources and its derivatives, and therefore use of DSI falls within the scope of implementation of the Convention and the Nagoya Protocol. It is very clear that free access and non-commercial use of DSI results in significant non-monetary benefits, generating valuable information for achieving the two primary objectives of the Convention. Thus, Costa Rica believes it is very important to promote and facilitate research. However, we also think that it's necessary to develop a mechanism to ensure the sharing of monetary benefits arising from the use of these sequences when used for commercial purposes. We believe that one possibility would be to have a global multilateral ABS mechanism that is complementary to the bilateral system already adopted by many countries currently. We believe that sharing the benefits arising out of the utilization of DSI should remain integrated into the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Likewise, we also think that it would be appropriate for sharing of benefits arising out of the utilisation of DSI to be triggered by events throughout the value chain. For example, prior to the commercialisation or registry of a patent. In this way, it would not be necessary to have a licence prior to using these sequences due to the very high number of transactions that this would generate. As a complement to this, mechanisms should be established to increase the quantity of sequences published in free access databases that have information about the country of origin of the genetic material used to generate these sequences. Finally, Costa Rica considers that it is key to reduce the gap between countries as regards their capacity to create and use digital sequence information. Thank you.
Thank you, Costa Rica. Muchas gracias, Costa Rica. I will now
Thank you very much, Costa Rica.
start to Switzerland, followed by Morocco, and then South Africa. La Confédération helvétique, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Switzerland thanks the Executive Secretary for the preparation of this item, as well as everyone who contributed to the work on this topic, which provides a helpful basis for further discussions. As stated in COP Decision 1420, we recognize the importance of DSI for the objectives of the CBD, while also noting the divergence of views among parties regarding benefit sharing. Switzerland does not support an extension of the term genetic resources to include DSI, nor an extension of the ABS mechanisms under the existing provisions of the Nagoya Protocol. However, we support further considerations of constructive, workable, efficient, and solution-oriented approaches to address DSI. In our view, such potential approaches must take into account the interests of all parties and stakeholders, in particular those that may be affected by any potential approach, such as the scientific research community, industry, and database holders. We therefore are of the view that any approach to further address DSI needs to take into account in particular the following criteria: the open access to DSI in public databases, legal certainty, practicability, a multilateral approach, a favorable cost-benefit ratio, the support of innovations based on DSI, and last but not least, the contribution to sustainable use and conservation of biodiversity. Switzerland is of the view that any decision taken at COP15 on DSI need in principle to lay within the legal framework of the CBD. Decisions that go beyond the legal framework of the CBD or the Nagoya Protocol would first require a mandate to revise these agreements. Regarding the possible elements for a recommendation, access to DSI for scientific research and innovation is crucial, and it should be recognized that open access to DSI in public databases constitutes a benefit for all stakeholders. Also, the strengthening of capacities, in particular in developing countries regarding accessing and using DSI, is an important element of possible approaches to address DSI. However, we recall the divergence of views among parties regarding benefit sharing and note that there is no agreement on a general benefit sharing obligation for the use of DSI. We therefore should consider possible approaches from a broad perspective rather than focusing on specific modalities. Finally, and in conclusion, we would like to express our willingness to engage into further discussions on potential ways forward, which take into account the various interests of parties and stakeholders. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you very much, Switzerland. Je vais maintenant donner la parole
I will now give the floor to Morocco.
by South Africa and Brazil. Le Maroc, vous avez la parole.
Morocco, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Morocco welcomes the outcomes of the meeting of the ATEG on digital sequence information and thanks the Executive Secretary and the other organizations for all the informal activities held on this issue of major importance. These activities have enabled information to be exchanged informally and the tempo to be maintained around this complex issue, considering the extension of the intersessional period as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. We support the intervention of the African group and believe that DSI could be the direct or indirect result of utilization of genetic resources. Among the categories of DSI on genetic resources enumerated by the ATEG during its meeting in March 2020, several involve scientific and technical information or data that provide an indication of the genetic and/or biochemical composition of genetic resources. They are therefore directly aligned with the definition of utilization of genetic resources adopted in Article 2 of the Nagoya Protocol. We have lost Morocco. Interpreter's note.
They are back, so maybe they can, yeah. Thanks.
Je peux continuer maintenant?
May I continue, Mr. Chair? Yes, certainly. As I was saying, in certain cases, the availability of DSI on a genetic resource. Oh, I've lost my place. In certain cases, the availability of DSI on a genetic resource from a user could make it unnecessary to access the physical genetic resource with the original provider. In addition, DSI is a complex issue requiring significant targeted capacity building in developing countries with respect to numerous aspects relating, among others, to qualified human resources, as well as to the technical means for generating and utilizing DSI. And that in addition to capacity enabling monitoring of the rapidly developing DSI-related technologies, as well as monitoring and management of our own genetic resources and biodiversity, it is necessary to take a concerted and efficient international approach to the DSI issue. Multiple strategic options are proposed in the Annex to document WG 2020/3/4, and the DSI criteria enumerated therein are relevant. We also believe that no approach to DSI processing should impede access to information on the digital sequences or significantly obstruct scientific research or innovation. Monetary benefits arising from the utilization must be shared in order to provide a substantial contribution to resource mobilization and to support conservation and sustainable use for the implementation of the post-2020 GBF. Finally, Morocco is in favor of the proposed elements of a draft decision. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Thank you, Morocco.
The floor to South Africa, followed by Brazil and Jordan. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. South Africa supports the statement made by Malawi on behalf of the African region. Mr. Co-Chair, South Africa welcomes the document prepared by the Executive Secretary to facilitate deliberations on DSI. It is widely accepted that digitization of genetic material represents a scientific revolution that forms part of the value chain. Globally, the exponential growth of the public databases and the associated technological advances in biotechnology offer new perspective for economic development. As a mega diverse country, South Africa does not want to see scientific research on biodiversity decline. Recognizing this need and recognizing DSI as a fundamental component of biology in the 21st century, it is imperative that DSI remain open access. We are aware of the importance of DSI in enforcement activities in areas such as wildlife trafficking. However, DSI is considered by South Africa as providing a loophole that inhibits a fair and equitable benefit sharing. As such, any advancement that is enabled by open DSI access should not exclude monetary benefit sharing. It is therefore essential that we find a solution in the context of the post-2020 GBF Otherwise, the framework will not be fit for purpose. South Africa is supportive of the policy option on global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism to address traceability and peak and MAT under bilateral system challenges. The monetary benefits of the use of DSI should go towards resource mobilization for conservation efforts and to promote the sustainable use of biodiversity. The modalities of benefit sharing through this policy option need to be elaborated and operationalized. In terms of the criteria framework, policy options that are effective in achieving the stated goals should be given priority. South Africa support that capacity is a key area that needs improvement. However, capacity building alone will not resolve all inequality that exists in a country's ability to generate and use DSI. Capacity building is also needed on intellectual property rights issues associated with DSI. In terms of the DSI scope and terminology, South Africa support the broad option that it should be recognized as part of genetic resources. Furthermore, observational data that provide contextual information are also important because they may facilitate interpretation of DSI and may therefore lead to a meaningful and useful understanding of the resource properties. In conclusion, South Africa support recommendations on traceability of information and data because accession numbers and consistent use of country tag by publicly accessible databases will facilitate identification of country of origin in those specific cases where single DSI is identified as having high value. Thank you very much, Mr. Coach.
Thank you, South Africa. I would like now to give the floor to Brazil, followed by Jordania, and then Argentina. Brazil, you have the floor.
With the conclusion of our ratification process last March, my delegation is happy to announce that since June, Brazil is a party to the Nagoya Protocol. It demonstrates the Brazilian commitment to the CBD, its three goals, and in particular ABS, which remains the Convention's most neglected objective. Since 2001, Brazil has a robust national legislation on this issue, which was reviewed in 2015. Brazil regulates the use of genetic information even if disengaged from the physical sample, since its first legal framework on ABS. Brazil has granted over 2,600 authorizations and established 295 benefit-sharing agreements, including cases that have used exclusively digital sequence information. As Brazil is both a provider and a user of biodiversity genetic resources, we understand that our experience of 20 years provides a solid ABS system to foster innovation and strengthen benefit sharing. Therefore, we are ready to deepen cooperation on this area and to adopt ambitious, concrete, and measurable targets in the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. My delegation takes this opportunity to thank all the participants in the ad hoc technical expert group on digital sequence information on genetic resources for their dedicated work. The outcomes of their meeting are a good starting point to our discussions. Recent assessments on how DSI is produced and on the number of providers and users highlight the substantial inequalities between developed and developing countries, thus emphasizing the fundamental role of capacity building and technology transfer in the discussions of DSI. Mr. Chair, Brazil hopes that all parties can work together to reach a consensus in Kunming regarding this topic. To this end, we must highlight two elements that must be included in a COP15 decision. First, a recognition that any approach to address DSI should not prevent access to digital sequence information or significantly hinder scientific research and innovation. And second, a recognition also that benefits arising from the use of digital sequence information on genetic resources should be shared fairly and equitably. The COVID-19 pandemic made clear the benefits of an open access to genetic resources, including digital information. It is clear that the unprecedented data sharing among researchers allowed for the conditions to a quick and effective reaction to the virus. Hence, Brazil advocates the most open and quickest possible access to DSI. Furthermore, We cannot keep an open door for parties to deny their obligations regarding ABS. We should move away from the threat of terminologies and subterfuges in order to avoid turning the Convention outdated and undermining its third pillar. The economic sectors most intensive in biotechnology are among the ones who have the highest growth in the past decade. The added value in the bioeconomy and the intellectual property rights in this sector have been growing fast. Therefore, ABS and DSI are not insignificant issues, and they must be addressed by CBD parties with the same relevance they have to international economy. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Brazil. Obrigado. I will now give the floor to Jordania, followed by Argentina and Uganda. Jordania.
الأرجنتين وأوغندا. الكلمة للأردن. شكرا. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank the Secretariat, the HACTIG, and the co-chairs. I'd like to thank the Government of Colombia for hosting. I'd like to inform you that the DSI technology is still within the mechanism of development and modernization. Therefore, we support the first option in the document to integrate all the DSI within the CBD and Nagoya Protocol. We call for the formation of a working group for researching these texts and adding them to the articles of the Convention and Protocol. This way, we would have a clear and binding legal framework, and especially in light of the fact that the International Treaty for Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture has suspended its negotiations regarding DSI pending the outcome of our work. We therefore emphasize the need for a mechanism for benefit sharing resulting from the use of DSI regarding genetic resources for each country. We should not neglect the need for capacity building when it comes to the methods of analysis that is used for determining digital sequence, dealing with it, and follow-up mechanism, especially for developing countries within the understanding of technology transfer and sharing of expertise, especially in light of Articles 16, 17, 18, and 19 of the Convention, as well as Articles 22 and 23 of Nagoya Protocol. We suggest all suggestions regarding capacity building in addition to what we have already highlighted. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, I will now give the floor to Argentina, followed by Uganda, and then Ecuador. Argentina, tiene la palabra.
Muchas gracias. Of the floor, Argentina. Thank you, co-chair. First of all, Argentina is pleased to thank the Secretariat for the work on DSI, on genetic resources, and recognise the work that's being carried out by the ATIC. And we very much appreciate the webinars and other initiatives that have facilitated the informal exchange on these matters. Argentina is a country with a large diversity of genetic resources given its large quantity of ecoregions and its territorial extent. Given the relevance of DSI on genetic resources for the three objectives of the Convention and for the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework, my country attaches great importance to the decision to be adopted by the next COP on this issue. On this matter, we have 5 points to share. First of all, Argentina believes that the COP decision should recognize that any approach to address DSI should not hinder access to DSI nor hamper scientific research. Secondly, As Argentina has pointed out on many occasions from the very beginning of CBD negotiations back in 1990, the concept genetic resource refers both to the physical material as well as the information derived thereof. Therefore, the parties should recognise in the COP decision that DSI constitutes an intrinsic characteristic of genetic resources, and as such they should be subject to the international provisions on genetic resources, including fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from their utilisation. Thirdly, we consider that the solution on ABS governance on DSI should contemplate, in fact, an innovative and effective mechanism that would change the status quo. We think that we still need a deeper analysis of the proposed policy options. In particular, we suggest that case studies should be carried out on each of the proposed policy options in order to be able to indicate their respective weaknesses and strengths and assess possible alternative combinations. Fourthly, the COP decision should recognise that capacity building is relevant and necessary when dealing with DSI, in particular technology transfer and provision of funding to address DSI in developing countries. Finally, we suggest inclusion of a fifth element into the COP decision, acknowledging that any benefit sharing approach on DSI should be oriented towards the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. Dear colleagues, delegates, we reiterate Argentina's willingness to participate in this important discussion in a constructive spirit in order to achieve substantial agreements at the next COP. Thank you very much, co-chairs.
Thank you, Argentina. I will now give the floor to Uganda, followed by Ecuador and Norway.
Thank you, Chair. Uganda acknowledges and commends the working group co-chairs and the Secretariat for the extensive technical information availed to the review of the implications of the use of digital sequencing information on genetic resources in context of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the objectives of the Convention, as well as the Nagoya Protocol. Uganda aligns with the position of Malawi on behalf of the African Group. Uganda welcomes the recommendations of the ad hoc technical expert group on DSI and wishes to underscore the following. Issues on sharing of benefits arising from utilization of DSI cannot be divorced from the scope of Nagoya Protocol on ABS and should therefore be handled within the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework of the Nagoya Protocol on ABS. Uganda recalls decision 14/20, which notes the term digital sequence information may not be the most appropriate, and Uganda associates with the scope of DSI as defined by the extended ARTEG under Group 3 category and proposes the term genetic science information. On policy, Uganda associates with the option of integrating DSI into the Convention and the Nagoya Protocol, in which case DSI would be regulated under individual country domesticated legislation of the Convention and the Protocol. Uganda supports the enhanced technical and scientific cooperation and proposes it become systematic and mandated part of the DSI policy. Enhanced capacity support will democratize the access and use of DSI, making it more equitable for access and use. On traceability, we support the inclusion of relevant passport data in databases, the linking of journal publications with genetic resources in the ex situ collections, the disclosure of the provider country in the case of patent applications, as well as the use of bioinformatics in traceability. In terms of measures of access, benefit sharing and compliance, we support a multilateral approach given the capacity constraints in compliance enforcement. Uganda supports
Secretariat seems to have lost Uganda. Can you hear or see them?
No, I cannot see them or hear them.
Okay, so then
We
in
can
the
come
interest
back
of time,
to, they have Uganda again, but
let's
maybe
Ecuador.
they can put their hand up again and come back later.
Okay, later. So let's come back to Uganda when we can, and let's move now to Ecuador, followed by Norway and Democratic Republic of Congo. Ecuador, you have the floor.
Ecuador agradece la importancia.
Ecuador thanks the important work carried out by the CBD Secretariat and the Working Group on Post-2020 GBF, as well as the ATEG for the guidance document on DSI on genetic resources. On the document itself, it's important to emphasize that Ecuador is one of the only biocentric countries, i.e., where nature, its components, and human beings are legal subjects that are independent when it comes to their coexistence. We also wish to underscore the supremacy of the Ecuadorian Constitution, which grants protection to nature and knowledge of biological or genetic resources as expressed through its organic codes. Specifically in Ecuador, DSI on genetic resources, where Ecuador is the country of origin, deserves recognizing both through monetary and non-monetary benefits. When it comes to regulating scientific research on biodiversity and access to genetic resources, Ecuadorian legislation purports to consider digital genetic sequences as genetic resources per se, and in order to point out use of DSI, it is considered important to include a specific clause on the subject within contracts, access to genetic resources, and also its derived products. Account is taken of non-monetary benefits for the state and the applicant, as well as fair and equitable sharing of benefits obtained from that information or data. Development and reinforcement of intersectorial monitoring and traceability mechanisms for the information derived from access to genetic resources should be considered. We also need to take account of the need to develop capacity at national level on DSI. Finally, it's also important to point out that as a country that is a producer and exporter of raw materials, it's necessary to safeguard our resources and the information derived thereof, which is why we have the following questions to put the Secretariat. Firstly, what are the current technologies and practices related to the exchange, use, and benefits of genomic information? Secondly, what is the scope of DSI and genetic resources when provider countries have not exercised their authority over the genetic resource as countries of origin? Thirdly, what will be the transparency mechanism on the rights and obligations of users regarding access to DSI on genetic resources, their exchange and utilization when Ecuador is the provider country? And fourthly, how will we prioritize and strengthen future debates on Article 10 of the Nagoya Protocol? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ecuador. I will give the floor back to Uganda so they can finish their intervention, and that would be followed by Norway and DRC. Uganda, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad to be back. As I come to a conclusion, stated that in terms of measures for access, benefit sharing and compliance, we support a multilateral approach given the capacity constraints in compliance enforcement. Uganda supports the proposal by the African Group for a retail sales levy of 1% on biodiversity products and an easily accessible multilateral system where prior informed consent and mutual agreed terms is not implementable. Finally, Chair, Uganda notes the importance of capacity building in DSI to facilitate the identification, utilization, monitoring, and management of our own biodiversity as a form of non-monetary benefit sharing. Uganda, however, notes that capacity building as a form of non-monetary benefit sharing should form part of the measures for benefit sharing that include monetary benefits. Therefore, we support the integration of capacity building in broader capacity building initiatives, taking into account the special needs and environments of each country. Our detailed statement has been submitted to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Uganda. I'll now give the floor to Norway, followed by DRC. Norway, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The mandate for the work of the open-ended working group on DSI is in Norway's view open and broad. Norway would like to emphasize the importance that this issue finds its solution, and we are ready to engage in the discussions to find one. From the outset, we would like to underline that the global biodiversity framework is universal in character and should be of relevance to many conventions, instruments, and processes which are also discussing DSI. The knowledge base has been expanded since the expert group finished its work. The global dialogues on DSI, hosted by Norway and South Africa and executed by the ABS Capacity Development Initiative, has been central in driving the discussions. The report from the second dialogue is posted online under other documents. Norway would like to point out that we should use our time between the open-ended working group Part 1 and Part 2, planned for Geneva, wisely. Work on assessing the possible modalities for benefit sharing and alternatives and the potential costs and benefits is crucial for identifying convergence. The link to resource mobilization should in particular be explored. We would like to make reference to the 5 options or models explored in the first global dialogue and the work on criteria for assessing policy options. Putting more flesh on these bones will be important for parties to take a stance. It is important that any approach promotes research and innovation. This is due to the simple fact that transformational change, which underpins the draft framework, is not possible without science, research, and innovation. We know that many countries, both developing and developed countries, rely on DSI. Therefore, we will also underline the importance of capacity development so that all countries can be able to benefit from DSI. Regarding the elements in the paper developed by the Secretariat, we do therefore want to point out the importance of open access to data, and that element 27A, in our view, seems to go too far in accepting negative impacts on scientific research and innovation. Any solution on DSI will have to be light on the X side. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Norway. Et finalement, la République des
And our last intervention is from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. You have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. The Democratic Republic of the Congo supports the statement made by Malawi on behalf of the African region under this item. On the DRC wishes to underscore the following points in the above mentioned statement. 1, the post-2020 global biodiversity framework should incorporate the issue of DSI in the form of a benefit sharing solution. In this context, Objective C of the Global Biodiversity Framework, as well as milestones C.1 and C.2 and Target 13, should be modified to include DSI. The Democratic Republic of Congo aligns itself with the reformulation of the text as proposed by Malawi on behalf of the African region. 2, for the Democratic Republic of Congo, DSI represents a source of funding for biodiversity and should be considered as such. 3, DSI is important for research on conservation and sustainable development of biodiversity. Unfortunately, this technology is not accessible for the majority of researchers. And 4, we welcome the areas of capacity building identified by the ATEG. And we call for special focus to be put on DSI capacity building to the benefit of developing countries. Thank you very much to the co-chairs. Thank you to the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
See no more requests from parties. I will now open the floor to other governments and organizations. I see the United States of America requesting the floor. United States of America, you have the floor. Your microphone and camera do not seem to be activated from what I can see here. If you look at the top left corner of your screen, they should be in red color. Here we go. Can you speak? I think we should be able to hear you now. We cannot hear you. Can we give the floor to United States of America? USA, can you hear us?
I think there is a problem with the microphone.
Secretary, can you help us with this? There seems to be some challenges, and I note that we're toward the very end of our time. So how about we adjourn our meeting for now, and we will be resuming tomorrow with the US and then the suite of the others. So and then we'll move on to agenda item 4. So colleagues, I will now be running the meeting, and we will be resuming tomorrow morning, starting with intervention from the USA. I encourage you all to join early to test your connection and microphone, etc. Thank you very much. Oh, before we leave, any announcement from Secretariat or other business?
No, except I think, as you have already said, if you're going to speak tomorrow, then it would be very good if you could check your mic before 7 o'clock. As I said, it will be the platform will be open 90 minutes ahead, and 60 minutes before you can check your microphone and camera. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And wishing you a good rest of your day, and looking forward to the discussion tomorrow. Bye-bye now.